Early in the morning of the 9th of June, 1944, under guard, all men between 16 and 60 years old, about 3,000 in total, were marched to Place Soillac in Tulle. From them, 120 were selected and prepared for execution. Under the aim of rifles and submachine guns stood schoolboys, peasants, and laborers, people entirely uninvolved in partisan activity. All selected were hanged directly on lamp posts and on the balconies of houses, forced first to climb ladders placed against them, then to step off. Death came slowly. They struggled for minutes in the nooses, suffocating, while the Nazis watched unmoved, coldly ignoring every plea for mercy. These were not spontaneous acts of revenge, but part of a pre-planned operation. The order came from SS Gruppenführer Heinz Lammerding, commander of the 2nd Panzer Division, Das Reich. The purpose of the massacre was to intimidate the civilian population, to demonstrate the price of any attempt at resistance. Such mass executions became a regular instrument of the occupation regime. With them, the Germans kept France in a state of constant fear. Until June of 1944, the resistance in France consisted of a network of small, scattered groups that carried out only minor acts of sabotage. Partisans would cut telephone lines, print leaflets, and set fire to supply depots. But after the Allied landings in Normandy, their actions rose to a qualitatively different level. To understand why the German response became so brutally severe, and how these scattered groups grew into a coordinated resistance movement, we need to go back to the first months of the German occupation. June of 1940 marked the beginning of dramatic changes in France. On May 10th, the Wehrmacht crossed the Belgian border, and by June 14th, German forces had entered Paris after a lightning-fast campaign that lasted around 6 weeks. On June 22nd, an armistice was signed in the forest of Compiègne. The Germans occupied the northern and Atlantic regions of the country, while the southern zone remained under the control of the Vichy regime, led by Marshal Pétain, who openly declared a policy of cooperation with the German occupiers. In the summer of 1940, the first acts of resistance began to appear. On June 22nd, near Rouen, partisans cut a telephone cable, one of the earliest sabotage actions. In July and August, the Cross of Lorraine became a symbol of Free France, suddenly and anonymously appearing on house walls. By the winter of 1941, the sabotage became more systematic. Underground printing presses were established. Arson attacks on fuel depots increased, and the partisans began collecting and transmitting intelligence to the Allies. Resistance groups formed in major centers, in Paris, Lyon, Marseille, and in port cities. Each partisan cell acted independently, but all were united by a shared determination to oppose the German occupation. After the Allied landings in Normandy on the 6th of June, 1944, the scale of operations expanded dramatically. Railways were blown up one after another, German convoys attacked, and armed efforts to free captured comrades intensified. This wave of sabotage forced the occupiers to escalate their repressive measures and led to tragic events that spread across the entire territory of France. In the first months of the occupation, the Germans limited themselves to local arrests, fines, and short-term detentions. But already by the fall of 1941, so-called special sections of military courts were established in France, issuing death sentences for provocations against the occupiers. The true turning point came in the spring of 1944, when units of the 2nd Panzer Division, Das Reich, experienced veterans from the Eastern Front, were redeployed to France. These troops began using far more aggressive methods of repression against the civilian population. Surprise raids, executions of hostages, and mass deportations to concentration camps. Already by the spring of 1943, a directive from Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler had been in effect at the highest level. For every German soldier killed, at least 10 ordinary civilians had to be punished. This rule turned repression into a finely tuned mechanism of intimidation, ranging from unannounced searches to public executions and the destruction of entire villages. Under these conditions, the Maquis resistance groups quickly grew in strength. German forces responded to their sabotage and attacks with increasingly harsh measures. Punitive operations became larger and more ruthless, creating a vicious cycle of escalating violence that ultimately led to the horrific tragedy in Tulle. On the 7th of June, 1944, the Maquis launched a surprise assault on Tulle. Around 200 partisans, armed with rifles and hand grenades, simultaneously attacked 4 targets: the barracks housed in the former girls' school, the train station, the town hall, and the post office. Interestingly, the workers at the railway depot refused to assist or cooperate with the Maquis units. Nevertheless, the attack on the garrison proved effective. The Germans suffered heavy losses, with estimates ranging from 30 to 50 dead and up to 60 wounded or missing. As the SS forces retreated, many of the same railway workers who had been detained at the station were executed on suspicion of aiding the partisans. By midday, the Maquis had nearly run out of ammunition. They were aware of the Allied landings in Normandy on the 6th of June and hoped to hold the town until reinforcements arrived. But they lacked both heavy artillery and armored vehicles. By evening, units of the 2nd Panzer Division, Das Reich, tanks, armored personnel carriers, and SS soldiers approached the outskirts of Tulle. Under overwhelming numerical and technical pressure, the Maquis fighters withdrew into the surrounding forests, avoiding encirclement. Their retreat left the town at the mercy of the SS. During the night, the occupiers carefully prepared for a punitive operation, and with the first light of dawn, their hatred and cruelty descended upon the civilian population. At dawn on the 9th of June, 1944, the SS began the massacre. First came the raids. Nearly 3,000 men between the ages of 16 and 60 were arrested in their homes and gathered in the main square of the town. Under the supervision of Gestapo officer Walter Schmald, 120 men were selected. After the intervention of local authorities, 99 of them were ultimately held. Groups of 10 were led to lampposts and balconies. A noose was placed around each man's neck, a ladder positioned against the support. Then, with a sharp movement, a German soldier kicked it away. The victims died slowly, gasping for air for several minutes, until one of the soldiers would end their agony with a gunshot. Once the last execution was carried out, the SS men sat down at tables outside the Tivoli Cafe, directly across from the square, drinking wine and listening to music as if nothing had happened. By midday, the bodies were loaded into trucks and taken to an open dumping ground on the outskirts of the K district, where young men from French labor camps had dug 2 long trenches. The dead were laid into the trenches, sprinkled with lime, and buried under layers of earth without any identifying markers. Thus, 99 innocent men were buried in anonymous graves, and the town square of Tulle would forever become a symbol of the terror of occupation. The next day, on the 10th of June, 1944, the SS carried out another round of raids. They selected 149 men from those who had not been included in the first group of the hanged and loaded them onto trucks. Some of these men were taken directly to the Dachau concentration camp, where by early autumn, more than 100 from that convoy had died. A former weapons factory building in the Swalach district was turned into a detention and interrogation site. There, SS soldiers working alongside the Vichy militia interrogated and tortured anyone they suspected of having ties to the Maquis. Witnesses still remember the horrific screams coming from the basement and the dull thud of rifle butts slamming against flesh. Meanwhile, the residents of Tulle came together like never before. Women and the elderly, many of whom had lost their breadwinners, passed flour and canned goods from home to home, secretly carrying water and medicine to wounded partisans, hiding in courtyards and cellars of private homes. At night, they carefully moved the bodies of the executed to the town's outskirts, burying them in unmarked graves. Local activists kept a record of the dead in order to preserve their names in the memory of the city. News of the tragedy spread quickly through nearby villages and underground Maquis cells. It did not so much intensify hatred for the occupiers, that hatred already ran deep, as it inspired many more to join the resistance. Local priests sheltered the wounded in their homes, and doctors risked their lives performing surgeries in clandestine medical rooms. The town of Tulle became not only a symbol of punitive terror, but also a new stronghold of the resistance. The memory of hundreds of victims, and the horrors of torture united surrounding communities and laid the foundation for powerful Maquis operations in the final phase of the war. The Maquis did not wait long to respond. In June and July, they organized large-scale sabotage missions. They blew up railway lines, destroyed bridges, and planted mines along the roads leading from Tulle to Limoges and Bergerac. One of the most notable actions was the operation in Moussignac, where, on the 6th of June, partisans disabled a convoy of military trains, severely disrupting the supply lines of German garrisons for an extended period. By mid-August of 1944, German forces had finally withdrawn from Tulle. On the 17th, the SS surrendered their weapons and handed control of the town to the mayor. The following day, the first Allied patrols arrived. The townspeople immediately began exhuming the bodies. On the 18th of August, youths from a local literary circle and military cadets carefully removed the remains from the unmarked trenches and transferred them to the new cemetery, where each victim received a wooden cross. In September of the same year, the first obelisk was erected in Place Soillac, engraved with the names of the 99 men who had been hanged. School children collected written testimonies from eyewitnesses and preserved everyday objects, determined to keep the memory of the tragedy alive. In this way, Tulle, having endured the horrors of public executions and torture, found a new mission: to safeguard the truth of the past and warn future generations of the fragility of freedom. This tragedy reminds us how quickly fear and cruelty can extinguish liberty, but also of the strength that comes from unity and belief in justice. By remembering history, the viewer can resist all forms of pressure and help keep the light of human dignity alive. If this video was meaningful to you, please subscribe, give it a like, and share in the comments what part of Tulle's story moved you the most.